back to yet another episode of the Kitabi Karwan podcast. Today we have with us Miss Chitwan Mittal, the founder of AdiDev Press, which is a children's book publication company which was launched in 2020. It's a really interesting concept on which they've built this entire publication house, which is a passion for children's pictures book combined with a deep love for South Asian culture. And what they plan on doing is using rich texts, beautiful illustrations, and high quality books to get kids in touch with their values and to South Asian culture, mythology, and just make reading a great experience. Without giving much away, let's jump right into the interview.
Hi Chitwan, welcome to the Kitabi Karwan podcast. I'm so glad to have you on my podcast today. It's very interesting the kind of work that you're doing as the publisher and founder of AdiDev Press. So, you know what? I generally kick off with a very different question, but because we're doing something new, I'll let you have the floor for a minute. And if you can tell us what AdiDev Press is all about.
Thank you so much, Siddharth, for having me here on your podcast. It's a pleasure to be here and to chat with you today. And AdiDev Press is basically a indie publishing company, which is very new. And we've come out with six picture books for children, 0 to 8 years of age. And the idea basically behind AdiDev Press is to create books that represent South Asian culture and people and perspectives, and to do it in a way that with very beautiful, rich quality books, rich in their text, rich in their illustrations, and inspiring. That is not didactic, which is not the typical way of doing books from the past, and
Right.
something that the child would love to hold and feel and remember as something they experienced when they were young.
Right. No, and I was so excited when I found out about your publishing house. You reached out over Instagram, and I first discovered it because it took me back to my childhood, right? So I personally grew up when I started reading. I started with this little known magazine called Magic Pot. I don't know how many people have heard of it, but that's where I started reading from, and then I migrated to what I think a lot of people do is your Amar Chitra Kathas, right? Particularly when it comes to your in mythology, and I was so glad because. I think I mean you can't read Amar Chitra Kathas before you're 6 or 7 until you have some basic grasp over the language. And I was glad that this publishing house was just coming out with a dedicated set of books which focus towards kids, right? So you mentioned that you are trying to do something different from what already exists out there in the market for these young kids. Could you elaborate on that? I mean, I see your illustrations are really beautiful, but anything particular that you've been trying to do?
So the books that I want to create are things I wish existed that would help me teach my own kids about their culture.
Right.
And when I mean, I live in Singapore and I have two young children here. And I just feel I was searching for more books about our culture. There has been a development in the publishing industry in the last decade, and there are more publishers trying to create books based on let's say festivals and biographies. But I still feel there's so much more scope. um, we've had decades of just rehashing Western books and fairy tales and reprinting them with the new illustrations, and that too. And also the quality of the illustrations is something that in India has been something very typical. It's not very imaginative. It doesn't, like, kind of give that spark of joy. And so I was trying to create books that will be like that. The Amar Chitra Kathas were great for our whole generation, but they are, like you said, you can't read them till you're a certain age. The language is a little
Right.
difficult. So
Right.
what can we do for younger children,
Right.
that will introduce them to their culture? Because sometimes when they're already very old, they have so much that they're exposed to these days
Right.
that they may not find that interesting anymore. So I wanted to focus on younger children
Right.
and showcase to them that there is so much about their culture to love. And in particular, there's biographies is something that we're focusing on in the later part of the year, and we're coming out with a lot of biographies because I feel that that's something that we don't have enough books on.
Right. No, and one thing that really fascinated me was when I was just reading up that brief bio I had of you. It mentioned your master's was also along something similar. So I just wanted to know if this is is the idea of AdiDev Press that goes back like to your college days, or is it just something that came to you later? I mean, what's your journey been like?
So I always knew I wanted to do something in education, but what that would be, I wasn't sure. I studied English education in Boston for my undergraduate.
Right,
And then I did my master's in values in education from University of London. That was a more philosophical perspective on how to teach values to children, why to teach values, which values. It was a philosophical kind of approach.
right.
And I was at some point also doing my PhD in education from
Oh,
London,
wow.
which I actually didn't finish. But afterwards, I was involved in some experiments and research for teacher training, and with the Gujarat government as a consultant.
Okay.
They set up two very innovative institutes in Gujarat when Narendra Modi was chief minister there. They set up something called the Children's University,
Right,
which was to do research at all levels of education, anything related to children, and Indian Institute of Teacher Education, which was a 5-year teacher education program,
right,
which would have an MEd and a BEd. So I was involved with those. Later on, I started my own educational consultancy called Educational Innovations,
right,
and that was to help schools in tier 2 and tier 3 cities in India to develop curriculum, to do teacher training,
right,
and to make lesson plans. And
right,
so it was kind of evolving what I wanted to do.
right,
And but there was this love for picture books which I had, which I didn't realize would be something that I would kind of make into a profession or grow.
right,
I said this before, but I used to, even in my university days, I
right,
used to just love to go to the bookstores, which the Western world has, those big bookstores,
right,
which which have those huge sections of, like, children's sections, and they have a Starbucks
right,
inside it, and
right.
you can take all your books and sit there, and
Yeah,
you can just browse and browse. And I would find myself going through children's books and selecting books that were very uplifting and inspiring, and that had
right,
beautiful production quality, and I would buy them. I didn't have any children, and it was something that I always kind of connected with.
right.
So
No,
when this
that.
happened in the last couple of years, it all
Right.
came together, I think.
Yeah. No, I can totally relate it, particularly the last bit about walking into a bookstore and just taking your books and sitting by the coffee shop. Like in fact, that for the longest time, I know I'm too young to have a retirement plan, but that's how I want to spend. Like once I have enough money in the world, like I just want to retire, open a bookstore which has a coffee place in it, and just sit and read there. But
Yes.
but it's quite interesting because your work sounds is one of those things which is really needed. It's helpful towards building society, which is one of the most noble things that could possibly be done by a human being. But what's interesting for me is the choice that you've taken, like of going the publishing house route, right? Because I mean, in today's terms, I think it's a burning question that'll always pop up with how what's happened with Westland. I mean, although there's some good news coming, I was figuring that there might be a white knight coming in. But with Amazon shutting down Westland, there's just been this uproar online. There've been a lot of people talking about how publishing is a dying business, and it's not a dying business, but it is suffering due to the rise of how OTT and how people have different ways of consuming content and piracy and God knows what. So like starting a new publishing house is a very challenging decision in that very context, right? So what was your I don't know, what convinced you to take that decision?
It was just baby steps. I had, of course, a lot of family that was saying, why don't you see how far you can take it?
Right,
I was like, I don't know if I can, I don't know if I should, I don't know if I should, but it was just like baby step. Let's try and do one project, and then let's do another one. And then it just, from writing the books to getting them illustrated, and then it just kind of took on a life of its own,
right,
and ended up being something which I said, okay, let's see the potential it can have, rather than just giving it up to a publisher.
right,
And then you lose control also. For as an author, I feel for me, a picture book is equally picture and word. I think the books that we've come out with won't be the same if they were illustrated differently.
Right.
And so that was such an important part of the journey. And if you go to a publisher, often you don't have control over the
Right.
illustrations and things
Right.
like that. So I
Right.
wanted to see where I could take these books and these ideas on my own.
Right.
And
So
slowly it just grew.
right. So Chitwan, tell us about your current collection. What's the new books that have come out? I was looking at the Hanuman Chalice, and that was again one of those. Again, so one of the best things about reading about AdiDev Press was that it just evokes so much nostalgia, because so I grew up in a Hindu household in Bombay, and my parents are from UP, and this is a fairly common thing that I've shared with my peers, wherein while growing up, like you memorize the Hanuman Chalisa, even though like kind of like your father or your mother, whoever is like into puja and everything, they kind of make you memorize it, and it just becomes a part of your growing up. Even though if you follow it or not, that's a different debate altogether. And it's very interesting to see like this attempt to teach people kids about what it actually means and what it translates to. So I mean that was very fascinating for me. But what else is on the table?
Yeah, so the Hanuman Chalisa, like you said, this was something I grew up with, as a lot of
Right.
people do in India. And it's something, it's close to your heart, but I always felt like I don't really understand all the words.
Right.
And when I had to teach it to my children, I was like, there has to be something out there that will bring it alive for them. And I
Right.
didn't find anything. There are books which explain the meaning of the verses, but then they're mostly text-based books,
Right.
and maybe for older children, maybe for adults. And then there's a little prayer books which are completely without
Right.
illustrations. And
Right.
so I wanted something that would really, something they can really hold and touch and feel, and that will just bring it alive. And so hopefully this is first in a series of prayers that we will do.
Right.
And it has really received a lot of and people have really loved the book. So it's very it's just a very nice feeling to to receive those reviews and feedbacks, and people are really appreciating the book.
Right.
And we have a Hindi alphabet book, which
Right.
is J for Jalebi. And there's a lot of alphabet books in the market,
Right.
but I feel that a lot of them are just kind of rehashing of the same thing.
Right.
And just because the publishing house maybe wants an alphabet book and it has to be made at a certain price, and it has
Right.
lots of stock images and the same type of
Right.
vocabulary, which is
Right.
uninspiring. I
Right.
wanted something that is really cute and fun, and that
Right.
the kid would love to read, and
Right.
that every child can relate to. Because
Right.
if you're learning Hindi and you're speaking Hindi at home, then
Right.
you're definitely talking about food. So, and then it's much easier to remember "tha se thanda" than it is to remember "tha se thatera," which
Yeah.
nobody
True. True.
understands.
True. That is true.
I think all the
And
textbooks have "tha se thatera."
yeah,
From
and it's actually far more important now, personally, in what I think is because like in the Indian education systems is so designed to stress on the English language rather than
yeah,
on Hindi, which, and honestly, I'm guilty of it because I didn't pay enough attention to my Hindi literature or my Hindi grammar, even though I come from a family which has Hindi as its mother tongue. But I regret not associating with the language enough to end up reading a lot of it, right? And something as basic as, all of us can recite our ABCDs, but I don't know if all of us can do our K, K, Gs pura. Like
yes.
I don't think I can. For at least I don't know about everyone else, and I can speak for a bunch of people around me at the very least. So yeah, and I think something like this is very interesting, because what you read as a child has such strong recall value as an even as an adult. It's absolutely differentiating in that sense. That's quite unique on your part. But Chitwan, now I'll just take a step back to kind of
Yes.
come back to you as a publisher, right? Because so I'm assuming you like to read a lot as well. So if you could tell us a bit about your reading journey and where it began and how it has flown.
So, I mean, I've always enjoyed reading, thanks to, I think, my mother introducing storytelling at a very young age. Bedtime stories were a very, significant memory in my head. I
Hmm.
remember every night that was a very important part of the day.
Hmm.
We read a lot of literature from England, obviously, Enid Blyton's and your Oliver Twist and whatnot, Black Beauty and
Right.
all of those famous fives. We grew up on all those stories.
Right.
And I've always enjoyed reading since then.
Right.
And as I grew up, I felt like I still always enjoyed reading children's, like, maybe middle grade, like novels, like Harry Potter was
Right.
something I devoured, and other such books, Percy
Right.
Jackson.
Right.
And I'd see all these people read like big, big novels. And I think I was still enjoying this type
Right.
of book
That's fine. That's perfectly
indirectly,
fine.
or maybe that's what was meant to be, because
Yes.
uh,
It
yeah.
gave you great ground for working with things. But and again, like it's quite clear like why you would enjoy Percy Jackson. Like I think it, I know, probably is like the next level for what AdiDev Press what ended up doing, right? Like for me, it was a very good introduction to Greek mythology, right?
Yes.
Even though I'd heard stories here and there, I think it just kind of that weaving into how things work worked really well. That actually makes me think about this. Like, is that something that AdiDev Press is also planning on? Like maybe working on a for like a not exactly a Percy Jackson kind of thing, but maybe it's like books for older kids, like stories revolving on mythologies or values.
I would absolutely love to, and let's send this out in the universe that that is something
Right,
Adidev Press would love to, but we would have to find the right fit, the right author,
right,
the right content, and we definitely need more books in that age category, which are
right,
rooted in our culture.
right.
And there are a few out there which I've been reading these days. I've been reading Arusha
Right.
series, and another series which I'm forgetting the name of. So there's a few books from some indie publishers in the US, which
Okay.
are some chapter books based on in our culture. But I
Yeah.
think there's scope for so much more.
Yeah.
I think
Of
we're
course there
very
is.
late in the game, and we can do so many more
Right.
books in this. So
Yeah.
for sure.
Because I remember so the idea of having values as the core of your story was is something that I had earlier seen as a kid. I used to read, I don't know if you've heard of Karate Tales or not. There used to be this cassette and read along books that used to come around, and Nasruddin Shah used to voice them, and they were either the Chatak Tales or the Panchatantra. I'm not sure which one, but they were these really cool stories where there was this imaginary Karate the bear who would like narrate these stories, and you could read the exact story which is being narrated on the cassette. And this is like that time when cassettes were a thing, so you could put them on and hear exact like a word to word thing. But you're absolutely right. I think our culture and like Southeast Asian culture has such unique stories, such stories which actually work towards building values and core systems within children and getting them to kids. I mean, I think you're solving a major problem for a lot of parents out there, right? And in fact, like a few of my listeners are in fact parents themselves or are on the cusp of parenthood. And so like I've spoken to them multiple times about this randomly. One concern which they often have is, and not just for books, right? I mean, that's as a parent, I guess you would also empathize with this, is the fact that making the right choice for your children, right? When it comes to what food they eat, what content they consume. So what is it that AdiDev Press does to kind of, I know, not address these concerns, but like to make sure that a parent is reassured? Like, what is it? I mean, to any prospective parent or who's thinking of buying a book from AdiDev Press, what would you like to pass on to them about? Well, this is what our process is, and this is why you should, you can trust us to kind of be the right content for your child.
So, for example, I would like to say that, we are rooted in values. Our books are rooted in values. Our entire series of Learning to Be, which is
Mhm.
the biography series, is based in values. So, this is like service with Guru Nanak, kindness with Mahavira,
Right,
peace with Buddha. But it's
right,
not done in the way that you would traditionally find stories done in India or South Asia. It's not done with the moral of the story at the end. It's not
right,
very preachy. It's not something that the child, because I think our understanding of pedagogy has evolved.
right,
We realize that instruction is probably the poorest way of teaching,
right,
and the least. I mean, although all formal schooling has traditionally been based on instruction, But now we are beginning to understand that actually, if the child learns more by example and the
Right.
child learns more by influence.
Right.
So I think our publishing and our books need to evolve with that understanding of pedagogy.
Right.
And if what the message I would like to convey is that books by AdiDev Press are have that kind of they're rooted in that understanding of pedagogy.
Right.
So our books will not be preachy; they're more suggestive, they're more inspiring, they're more
Right.
subtle in
Right.
their text, in their ideas, in their presentation,
Right.
and we hope that the messages of these values will actually find root deep within the child through these books.
Right. No, and that's a very fascinating point you make. Like the first bit, particularly about how, unfortunately, how the education system, at least in India, has been very has just been very instructive rather than letting the kid discover. And I think people like you and I, and maybe like some people slightly more older than us, who have firsthand gone through this post-liberalization education system, kind of know how what instructive education does to us and how we found our routings through different uh, like other ways of discovering life and how we would prefer for our future generations to kind of have that. And the second bit is I absolutely love that it's not going to have this the moral of the story kind of thing, because I think that's also what redefines like Indian philosophy and culture, that if you take up any of our myths or like mythologies or any of our stories, all of them all of them celebrate gray. They aren't black or white. And I think that is a very core component of discovering what a child should be allowed to discover what he or she does. Like I often, like, I'm a huge fan of the Mahabharata, and I've often found myself questioning, and I think most adults do, whether hypothetically, what would a child's reaction be if they were not told that Karn or the Kauravas are on the bad side, when he or she reads something about him, whether they'll see him as a hero or not. Like, and ideally, you always, as a kid, you always see him as a villain, and it takes time to kind of that maturity to kick in. So it's great that like you're attempting to kind of take away that black and white bias and kind of infusing some gray into this. Um, so like again, I think we got off track of your reading narrative. I really wanted to know what your, so I know obviously it's a crime to kind of ask a passionate reader about their favorite book, but I would rather ask you, what have there been some books that have really impacted you as a person, like they've really kind of made you think or made you change the way you do things, or have influenced you in whatever you do in life, or has just shaped made you take a major decision? Any, it might be one, it might be few, whatever it has been for you.
I'm a student of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. I don't know if
Right.
you've heard of them. He
Not
was a
but
freedom fighter
yeah, right,
from
right.
Bengal, and
Yes,
then
yes.
he was in prison. The British put him in prison, and after that, he was
No,
released. He
or
went to Pondicherry, which was a French
yes,
colony,
yeah,
and there he did the spiritual yoga, and he
right,
wrote a books on his philosophy. And
right.
there was a French lady called Mira Alfasa, who's known as the Mother.
Okay.
So I'm a student of their works, and their books and their philosophies have really impacted my life.
Right. Okay. And in what sense? Like, you could just give us an example, maybe.
So it's one of the main things in his philosophy is that we are, I mean, the how to say, so the your spiritual journey or the yoga that you do
Mm-hmm.
is not just to achieve salvation or to find a peaceful exit from the earth, but to
Right,
actually bring that higher spirit or your inner self to do work in this world.
right,
So the goal of your journey should be to help the world
right.
uh, in whichever way possible. And I
Right.
think that message has been very central to my life. And
Mm.
I think if I had to say one thing that has really impacted my life, it's been that. And I guess it is with that vision that I want to, work for AdiDev Press and make that contribution to children's learning.
No,
myself
that's a
contribute.
very noble thought, and I just had this like thought pass through my head, like it could possibly be like 20 years from now, like there's someone having a similar interview, and someone will be talking about how AdiDev Press's books have kind of been the ones which have impacted them with these very thoughts, and it's, I mean, because that's what happens at the end of it. What you consume as a child is so important in shaping what kind of adult you grow into and the kind of society you contribute towards. And yeah, and it's like, I mean, very honestly, Chitwan, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast in the first place, because generally I have authors and translators, and this is a very niche segment which there are a few of my listeners who tune into. But I guess it's very, for me, I think it was very important to kind of put out the message that there are people who are there is content out there which is genuinely working towards improving children's lives and their exposure to Indian culture and values, which will shape them for generations. I mean, you can always talk to an author about the gray areas of a novel that they're writing and about humanity and stuff, but that's just like far into the future. It's the baby steps that really count. Chitwan, we are unfortunately running out of time on the podcast. So I just have one quick question to go to actually before we run away. First of all, is what's next coming from AdiDev Press? We have the Hanuman Chalisa, the Joe for Jalebi, and we can see a few of the books in the background. What's coming out next from you guys?
So we have very exciting this particular series that I was saying on biographies. We
Right,
have a whole lineup of books in this series. We
right,
have four women in science and four
right,
books on sportswomen.
right.
And then going forward, we are developing books on performing artists, change makers, and we
Okay,
really hope to grow this series on biographies for young children.
okay,
And it's called Learning to Be. So it's something, actually, the title that was inspired by a UNESCO report,
okay.
something I haven't mentioned to anyone before, actually, on education, which was called Learning to Be.
Right.
So
Okay.
yeah, so that's
That's
that.
quite
And then our
interesting.
bilingual books, we have a whole set of bilingual books coming, because I
Okay.
think we realize now the value of learning our mother tongue, and
Mhm.
other, some publishers are doing good work in building more regional language books. So we have three really fun and exciting Hindi and English bilingual books, four actually in the works,
Right.
and hopefully by the summer we should be close to releasing them.
Okay.
There's a set of three based on animals, doing really fun and quirky things, introducing vocabulary of food and clothing and musical instruments and
Right.
numbers in a lyrical, fun, yeah, very, very quirky
Yeah.
way.
Okay. And so I'm glad that there's such an exciting lineup coming out. So what's next for you? I mean, I know you've worked on a lot of these books. You're credited as an author or as a writer on a few of them. Uh, are you actively working? Are you the one who's actively writing the ones which you just described, or are you writing something else? Is there something? Are you planning writing on something for adults? Is that on the horizon? What's up?
So for me, as it started with me being an author, and then ended up being me being the publisher. And as a publisher, my role has expanded to so many things, from getting the books printed to marketing them to sales and
Right.
distribution, international distribution. And so writing has definitely taken a back seat, although I would love to write more. I have a few of the bilingual ones are from me. The Learning to Be series, we have collaborated with another author.
Right.
um, so I'm doing a mix of the writing as well as the handling the larger picture. But I do hope to be working with more authors, and to grow the scope of and style of books that AdiDev Press is going to present in the future.
Right. Well, thank you for that, Chitwan. Just one last thing. Where can we find them? Where can my listeners find your books? Are they available on Amazon, Flipkart, your website? Please let us know.
So the books are available on our website, adidevpress.com. They're available on amazon.india.in, and they are with select independent bookstores. They're with the Cool School in Gurgaon. They're with Eureka in Delhi. They're with Funky Rainbow in Bangalore. So, and they're reaching out to many retailers through distributors in the north and in the east. And we're working towards finding more distributors so it can have more penetration. So very soon it'll be available to everyone.
Well, thank you, Chitwan. Thank you for tuning in and joining us for doing this podcast interview. It was absolutely lovely having you here, and I'm pretty sure my listeners who have kids or are about to have kids or just care about children education or the kind of content children should consume would absolutely enjoy the works of AdiDev Press. And all the very best to you. And I really, really hope all the success comes to AdiDev Press.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you, Chitwan.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please check us out on all our social media platforms. We're available across all podcasting platforms on YouTube, on Instagram. You can find us at the rate Kitabi Karwan on Instagram, or just search Kitabi Karwan on Google or a platform of your choice and you'll find us. We carry out Instagram lives, giveaways, we talk about books, we talk to bibliophiles, talk to authors, and basically try and create a reader's world through all of our platforms. Do check us out and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.